Hello and welcome to episode 420 of the Crate and Crowbar, a gaming podcast being recorded on the 22nd of June 2023. I'm Marsh Davis and tonight I'm joined by Tom Senior.
Hello.
And Jamie Britton.
Hello.
Welcome back, guys. We've been off the air for a couple of weeks, partly due to holiday, in my case, and the opposite of holiday, I guess, which is work, and maybe also the other opposite of holiday, which is illness.
COVID, sadly.
But as we wait for the definition of those opposites to be ratified by the Pip-Tom Opposites Committee, I entreat you to cast your minds back a week or however the fuck long it was to the Summer Games Spectacular that never happened. Not E3. But though E3 is dead, upon its fetid, swollen carcass, all manner of new beasts have begun to feast. See, slurping nervously at the dread fluids that leak from E3's fly-blown orifices, hunches the PC gaming show. There, plucking out an eyeball, is Ubisoft Forward, and there, bursting from E3's ruptured belly in a spray of effluvia, stands real human man Jeff Keighley, screaming. Just screaming and screaming. And what is he screaming? That's right, it's games. So let's talk about some of those games, although perhaps let's deal with the format first. How was this new semi-remote, bizarrely fractured E3 for both of you?
Oh, fractured is the word, I think. All the sort of my favourite websites did their loyal best to sort of get everything together and make it sort of give you sort of an arrangement of the incredible number of new games, but a lot of very forgettable new games, a kind of swarm of disparate announcements. And I actually do feel like the lack of a unified kind of focal point for these announcements has kind of definitely taken the wind out of the sail of E3 season. And also, I would have thought that one of the benefits of having E3 sort of be disparate is that you actually get to announce things at different times where you have your own space, instead of everything overlapping all at once. And all these games still sort of fighting each other for space. So I found it to be like actually a pretty confusing series of a few weeks, to be honest, from start to finish. And I've emerged with a kind of confused sense of what the gaming landscape looks like, purely based on the various shows and presentations and Nintendo Directs that have happened over the course of the last month or two. It feels as though all of that could have been spread out and all of the games could have had their more space and more, more kind of room for people to look at them and analyze them and get excited about them.
It's weird if you, like a lot of people, like you get into video games when you're a kid and then you kind of come back to them. You sort of drift away from them in your 20s and then come back to them a bit later in a kind of meaningful way, because if you do that, you might not necessarily know who Jeff Keighley is. And then you come back to video games, and as I did in kind of my late 20s, early 30s, and like this guy is there and he's a big deal and no one's quite sure why, apart from the fact he's sort of been there forever. And
I've been here the whole time and it's still inexplicable. I could assure you.
I actually like him. I think he's good at what he does. I think when they did like the Elden Ring reveal trailer a couple of years ago at the Summer Games Fest thing, or maybe it was the Game Awards, and him like kind of practically bursting into tears at the anticipation of him announcing it was kind of, it was quite cool. It sort of spoke for, I was super excited about that trailer too. It was less exciting this year when he started off the show by saying like, we're going to have a big reveal. Don't you worry, Gamer Nation. There's going to be a big reveal. Ooh, yeah. And then getting to the end of the show and he was like, the rumors are true. Here we go. Like this. And then it was a trailer for the new Final Fantasy VII remake game, which we all knew was happening and is not a big deal at all. And you could just almost feel the collective sigh of like, oh, okay, right. So no one had any rumors about this. We knew that this existed. So all you're doing is just making up a rumor. So I thought that was a bit of a downer to the evening, because it would have been great if they had like, the Bloodborne remaster that everyone wants, or something like that,
Oh yeah, that's the only reason I watch these things now, is for the PC version of Bloodborne to be announced. Yeah. It never is.
No, but it still trends on Twitter about once a week.
Yeah, it was very strange. I found it very difficult to keep track of everything, and I felt like a lot of the news sites that were reporting on it didn't really know how to gather together all of the information in a way which presented the most important things first. Because I feel like in its heyday, when the platforms were really fighting each other, they all had their own conferences. And even though they filled those conferences with absolute bullshit, and the CEOs never have a finger on the pulse of what actually interests the people watching those things, and cars would be hung from the ceiling for no obvious reason, and so forth, glitz and glam that didn't really have any relevance to games. But you always came out of those conferences with an idea of what the most exciting things were. Mm-hmm. And I found it very difficult to understand from the coverage of what the most exciting things were. And that shouldn't be a struggle, really, for an event such as whatever replaces E3. And even Jeff Keighley's own show seemed to have no discernment between announcements which were of import and which ones were complete fluff, like getting Nicolas Cage on stage to announce that he's lent his likeness to a bad guy in the DLC for a multiplayer game that I haven't played. Just didn't seem like, that should have ever taken up any time or space.
He's not even a bad guy. He's playing like a PC, like one of the survivors.
Oh, is he? Oh, right.
Yeah. How rubbish is that?
I thought he was the antagonist going around killing people.
You'd hope, wouldn't you? Like crazy Nick Cage. It makes sense. But no, he's just like he's just running around.
That said, all of that nonsense aside, and how difficult it was, at least for me, to something like extract meaning from it, I feel like ultimately, like the slew of games that were announced was more promising this year than in previous years, and there was a bunch of stuff to be excited about, I think. Do you guys want to jump in and discuss any highlights that you have?
I'm actually super curious about Assassin's Creed. Like, I really want to know what Mirage is going to be like to play. So I'm really interested in the sort of genre switch or re-angling of that series. Obviously, it's been quite a heavy RPG focus, lots of numbers and combat, stuff like that, and it feels like it's going back to its roots, and it's going to be more of an action game and more of a moment-to-moment stealth game, perhaps.
Maybe.
Very, very, very difficult to tell because they've shown surprisingly little of actually how it works so far. But I feel as though that's going to be an interesting one. The other one majorly on my radar is Starfield.
Of course.
Partly because I love the idea of that kind of near future sort of NASA styling space exploration game with the kind of budget and the resources behind it that Bethesda have applied to the Elder Scrolls games and things. That's obviously an appeal, but also because I know it's going to be hilarious. Like, it's just the way that Bethesda tend to roll out these games. They're always, like, let's be honest, a bit rough. And there's going to be loads of funny stories and interesting broken quests or funny ways that people are going to break the game. And that's going to be a delight. Yeah.
They tapped into something by because they had a what was it called, Starfield Direct, where it was a half an hour of footage from the game interspersed with anecdotes and discussion with the actual devs themselves. I think they tapped into a thing hitherto less mentioned in the promotion of Bethesda's massive RPGs, which is, filling your Starship hold full of sandwiches that you've stolen. And that kind of like outre prattery seems to be really the big engine behind those games.
Yeah.
And less about all of the other stuff they typically promote.
They also did a very good 2001 match cut of a sandwich in a spaceship, which was
yes, that was very good,
very funny.
that was the best. Genuinely, that was the best moment in their entire thing. I was pretty skeptical of it because this past showing I felt very bland to me. I think that in the last time we saw footage from it, the very first interaction they demonstrated was like harvesting some ore. With a mining laser.
Hell yeah.
One of the most boring possible things you can do in the game.
No. What do you mean? It's the best possible video thing you could do in any game.
And the promise of 1,000 planets is an odd one. I feel like that is a line that is pure marketing spaff, in that it's a big enough number to prevent handcrafting, which is worrying to me. But it's also quite a bit smaller than infinity, which is generally what you get with ProcGen, right? I mean, if they can generate 1,000 planets, they can absolutely generate an infinity of planets. They will just not necessarily be interesting, as illustrated by No Man's Sky. But I feel like they've set the limit at 1,000 because that's a bigger number than most people will ever explore. But it avoids that marketing line, which came back to bite the No Man's Sky devs. But I don't know that 1,000 is still a good number. Like it's just going to be like I said, go for 5, man. Just have 5 planets. That's fine. I like I think it's very handsome just in itself. Like the engine is obviously very accomplished, and the combat looks quite peppy. I love the sort of bootstrap NASA look that they've gone for. But in other regards, like they seem to have very intentionally ticked off sci-fi cliches. So there's there's a cyberpunk planet, there's a pleasure planet, there's a cowboy in space planet for some reason. And I know that they're obviously doing that intentionally because they're going for a broad audience, and that broad audience loves generic stuff, or at least they'll love one of the genres on offer. But it doesn't yet feel like a game with anything to say for itself yet. Like the customization of stuff looks wonderful. I know I'm going to lose hours building my spaceship, but like I feel like I'm increasingly less interested in the sort of pitch of go anywhere, do anything. This is a tabula rasa. This adventure is yours to make. I actually want more of an authorial voice in games. Like I want to be told something or taught something or brought to some revelation that I wouldn't have while sort of noodling away in a masturbatory, self-directed entertainment. I went to a cafe the other day for a quick snack before a long car drive, and I got the chicken sandwich, and the lady was like, "Well, what would you like on that?" And I was like, "Well, I guess I'd like the contents of a chicken sandwich that I'd hope that you would have imagined for me." And she was like, "No." All you get with a chicken sandwich, unless you specify otherwise, are 2 dry halves of a bun and a piece of chicken, and anything else you have to tell me. And I realized that, I know obviously that's good for people who have dietary requirements, and particularly here in America, people like to be able to detail every component of a meal. But for me, like the reason I come to a cafe or a restaurant, and the reason I don't just make my own chicken sandwich, is that I want their expertise, I want their discretion, their sense of taste, their passion, their culinary inspiration. I want them to tell me what they think is an amazing, delicious, life-changing chicken sandwich. And then I will go, sure, whatever, it sounds good. Then I'll eat it and I'll gain further weight and feel bad about myself. But I feel the same way about games. Like freedom is great, but like, what are you saying? Like, what's your story? What's your thesis? What is the thing that you want to tell people and make them feel? And give me that. And like, I don't feel I get that from Bethesda games very often. The games have a lot of stuff in them, and hours of them are good. Absolutely, I like those games, but the hours that are good are also adrift in a sea of like experiential porridge that doesn't always have any particular flavor. And just going by the narrative / design choices that they've surfaced for the videos so far, they don't sell me on the idea that they personally have any fiction that they want to tell, that they are motivated to tell people. It's space pirates and it's alien artifacts again, and it's spacemen in cowboy hats, like Firefly, a thing that already exists. It's our experiments are being disrupted by the local wildlife. Could you handle it? And sure, the ship construction, the base building and so forth looks very, very cool, but I'm not sure yet that I want to invest my time into that kind of creativity if the setting in which that happens otherwise does not invite my curiosity.
Yeah, sort of. Let's think about the Fallout games that Bethesda made. Actually, they had really good, interesting, self-contained quests. You go to a vault, and it would be a whole kind of self-contained mission with its own story and this vision of the world, and then you could wander into like a whole vicinity in one of them, and it would be owned by a faction that harked back to the Romans, and you'd have to sort of like convince them. And there was definitely sort of a kind of crude factional interaction between different state like places in the world that was really fun and interesting, and actually often played for laughs. Often like very like funny outcomes. You had, I think, Fallout 3, there were some people dressed up in cardboard suits pretending to be superheroes in one corner of the map, and that was this whole self-contained story. And what I would hope for from stuff like Starfield is, it seems like it's very serious in comparison to all of those comparisons. But I'd love to sort of land on a planet or set up a base somewhere and sort of find a story like that. And I really hope that that sort of creativity and that kind of sense of fun is still present in, like, you might have to find it, but it's still there in Bethesda RPGs. But yeah, it's hard to, obviously that's probably not the thing you put first in your marketing materials, but I really hope that's there still in Starfield.
I would say that, you know, the thing is with like the Fallout games, for example, is that they're built on a universe that was created by someone else, right? It was created by Interplay in the 90s. And I would say that it's a much more, it's conceived with a much more originality and like kind of specific choice making than I would say the Elder Scrolls games, which I have never really, had much to say about the lore or the world building or sort of anything in those games. You know, they're basically, they provide a good sort of, I would say at best, solid fantasy world for you to play around in. But it's not a game. It's not a world. It's not like a universe that you carry around with you. You know, it's not like Lord of the Rings, or even like something like out of like a Dark Souls game or something like that. Like there's a wonderful sense of place, certainly, but there's very little sense of character, I think, to Oblivion and Skyrim and things like that. I think they do other stuff well, and I would very much agree that I think at the moment Starfield is just looking very like a butter sandwich or an ungarnished chicken sandwich, as you say. I just think I really want to be more excited about it, but I do think they've just made a bunch of very generic decisions, and I wish they hadn't really. I think, to sort of bolt together modular versions of a bunch of different sci-fi tropes and ideas that we know from elsewhere, and just sort of hope that kind of works as a playground for players. I don't know. I think it would have been more interesting and exciting if they built, like, if you think about how weird and wonderful the universe of Mass Effect is, and how many unusual and bold choices there are in there. It doesn't run away from every single trope imaginable. In fact, it embraces just about all of them. But it twists and kind of changes those things into something that's like identifiably original. And maybe they will in this game, and maybe they're just sort of, playing to the crowds in that trailer that they're showing. So I would hope that they go for a less conservative interpretation of those tropes, definitely.
Imagine if all of that taken on that, all of this effort was put into a game based on The Expanse, which I think Telltale have an Expanse game coming up. But The Expanse is an intensely political take on how humanity might expand within the solar system. And there are, factions, and there's some really cool hard sci-fi stuff about how humans will grow differently in 0G compared to humans who grow on Mars in like lower G, and humans who grow on Earth like with 1G. And even those physical differences have an impact on how they interact and how diplomatic exchanges work and where you meet and things like that. And there's also fiercely hard sci-fi idea of how space combat works in terms of just flinging objects and having them infinitely accelerate through through space, swing around a planet and hit something and that kind of stuff. That kind of hard sci-fi energy that it feels as though aesthetically Starfield is channeling. It feels as though there's nothing behind it. Not that I demand that it be an Expanse game, but that as an example of how that type of environment and that type of fictional situation can be exciting and actually say something about people.
Rather than just the cyberpunk pleasure planets. Horny in space, come to Blowjob City. Honestly, it's just about one of the most tired tropes. I wish they hadn't shown that.
Oh, you see, I can just about take that, but it's the Firefly-like setting. You know, like when Firefly first came out, I was like, oh, it's a Western, but it's in space. I see.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a part of game development which thinks it can just put a cowboy hat on something, and suddenly it channels this idea of rugged frontiersmanship to everybody who plays it. Whereas my main intertext for cowboy hats are male strippers, and it just doesn't have the same meaning to me. I don't think it has the same meaning outside of America even. So it's always weird to me where you get this kind of swaggering cowboy thing in space. It just feels like, oh, that clearly wouldn't happen. Like that's 100% not the future we're going towards.
I think it was maybe in direct response to that clip, but someone posted on Twitter the thing from Futurama where they're able to go to the edge of the reality and look across at the alternative reality, and it's all of them, all of the Futurama gang, all wearing cowboy hats. And then someone says, "Oh, and there's an infinite number of different dimensions," and then someone says, "No, it's just these two." Very funny.
I feel like you do need whether it's a hard sci-fi or not, it doesn't need to be hard sci-fi, but I feel like whenever you come up with the world for your game, you need to have some fictional core to it, which
they have. It's NASA punk, Marsh. They said it several times during the presentation there.
But I'm not sure that bleeds out into the other parts of it in any meaningful way, because you've abandoned NASA punk as soon as you go to the cyberpunk place. You've abandoned it as soon as you go to the Firefly-like setting. Space pirates have no NASA punk frills to them as far as I can see. It's just there's no kind of you need things that are your raison d'etre, like some kind of motivational core which then affects the rest of your world building. Otherwise the reason for your world building is we wanted to make a game with a bunch of different settings in it, and I'm sure like within the constraints of those different settings the quest builders will come up with interesting stories where their authorial merit will emerge, but like just there's no kind of top level to that fiction which feels coherent or interesting to me. And I feel like that the whole do anything freedom mantra of a certain subsection of gamers, which at one point sort of included me, was partly justified in the early 2000s by how bad the constrained linear stories were in the games of that era for the most part. But now I feel like for a good 5 to 10 years, there's been a massive diversification of the audience and the talent making games, and it allows us to tell much more interesting stories, not necessarily linear stories, but obviously authored stories. And it wasn't the authorship that was necessarily a problem, or even the linearity. It was that the stories that were being told in the early 2000s were invariably about a bald, angry man who has to hit or shoot things because they put his wife in a giant metal sarcophagus or whatever. And now you have like Citizen Sleeper, with its sequel just being announced at the same conference. And that's about like a robotic refugee whose very consciousness is a byproduct of indentured servitude, trying to make a life, in the collapse of space capitalism. And that, whatever you think about, whether that appeals to you or not, that's clearly a story that somebody set out because they wanted to tell it, and not because it appealed to an 8 to 12 teenage boy demographic, or that it could be outfitted with extractive microtransactions. not that Starfield promises microtransactions.
No.
So that was a completely misleading argument.
But it is true that back then we were very anxious about like space in games, like literal space and environments in which we could explore, And I think you're absolutely right that might have been a bit of a misnomer, and what we actually wanted was emotional and stories and so it was less you see those mountains in the distance, you can climb them. It's more you see those mountains in the distance, they are a metaphor for your mother's breasts and your repressed childhood.
It's actually weirdly like this calls to mind like something like Sunless Sea or like the Fallen London universe as an example. Like I think there are loads of examples of this where you do feel as though you're still guiding your own story, but whenever you land on an island or go to a given port, the world you're surrounded by is saying something about how unregulated guilds are exploiting humans in this place. It's actually like quite political. And or in this other place, there are 3 crones who might be witches, but actually, when you sort of talk to everyone, they don't seem to actually have powers, and yet they just own this island for some reason. And and you act within those parameters. And obviously, it would be absurd, and it would ruin the whole game if you could sort of go and just shoot them all, which is the old video game thing to do, the classic video game solution to those problems. But I kind of, that criticism of Starfield resonates, because I don't think that's ever going to happen in that game. At a guess. I think that's a fair guess, though.
I feel a certain amount of sort of sympathy, but like, it's a tricky problem they have to engage with, because they are, they've been around for a long time. They've been making games like this for a long time, and people definitely want games like this. There's a certain breed of gamer for this is the only game they want, right? This is the only game they'll play, really, and they're super looking forward to it, because their favorite game is basically whatever Bethesda make. And so, like, I certainly see that it's not necessarily the easiest decision to go, like, right, let's make something completely different, and it's, it takes place in fractal space, and there's no reference points to anything anyone's seen before. But I mean, it'd be interesting. I mean, perhaps the promises about scale and size are true, and there will be room in there for a whole bunch of unusual and interesting stuff, along with the more, cowboys in space type vibes. It'll certainly be an exciting game. I think, like, getting in a spaceship and taking off from a planet and shooting some aliens in the sky and then landing on another planet is always going to be pretty good, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And like the combat actually looks really quite good from what I've seen. So I'm excited for that.
And I like the look of this. I like the look of the spaceship building, and I like that you could board people's spaceships, like shooting some fools and then landing on them and going in there and shooting them in the head. I mean, that's pretty good, isn't it?
That's pretty grand. That's video games.
Sorry, I've had 1 gin and tonic, so that was why there was a breaststroke and me using the word fools.
How do you guys feel about the revolutionary, never before seen fiction, completely original of Star Wars Outlaws?
I've watched Andor, which is a fantastic television show, and I think even if you don't know anything about Star Wars, that's a pretty good show about a space rogue trying to survive and getting into scrapes. And I don't want a video game that's just watching that. Like, am I actually going to be able to be an outlaw in the Star Wars universe? That's an amazing premise. Like, it's such a good idea, but I don't know, like, to what extent is it going to be like a super linear story where, like in the recent Jedi game, like it's a very like conceived path for your character throughout, or am I actually good at, like, to what? Basically, my main question is, how much skullduggery can I get into in this one, and for the game to survive and let me sort of play.
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer based on the footage they've shown.
Oh yeah, it's always nothing.
Probably quite canned. But I found it reasonably charming. It certainly doesn't look like an obvious misfire in terms of fulfilling the Star Wars fantasy. How about you, Jamie?
Yes, actually, I did manage to see that particular trailer, so I have nothing on that. I'll tell you one kind of completely opposite trailer that I really like the look of. I can't quite remember which one it was. I think it might have been announced during the PC Gaming Fest. Was Baby Steps, which is the new game from. It was during the Devolver Digital thing. It was Baby Steps, the new game from Bennett Foddy, which is basically QWOP but Skyrim, and like. This is a game. So basically, you are sucked through your TV into Skyrim / Middle Earth, and then I guess you're just having to sort of using difficult key inputs walk your way through this world. It looks like a game I will never play, and I think it's probably quite intended to be a game that lots of people won't play, but people will stream on Twitch and things like that, because it turns out that Bennett Foddy games like this and Getting Over It are really excellent, like, spectator sports. But it really, really made me laugh in a way that trailers almost never do. There's an argument at the end of it between the protagonist and some random guy who is played by Bennett Foddy, who's got this great accent. I love Bennett Foddy's voice. He's got this kind of wonderfully wry, slightly sarcastic, but quite friendly Australian accent. And they just have a really fantastic bit of like Flight of the Conchords style bickering at the end of this trailer. And yeah, I just think it looks really good fun, really interesting. And I love anything that comes out of Bennett Foddy's deranged mind. So I'm super excited about that one.
You guys excited for Alan Wake 2?
It's the noise I would make about Alan Wake. I feel I enjoyed Alan Wake, but I feel as though like a collection of games journalists fell in love with it a bit too much.
They weren't me.
No. I love Remedy as well, but I feel as though it's one of their weakest. I actually haven't played the Microsoft game they did that was sort of like Quantum something. Anyway,
Quantum Break. Yeah,
it was Quantum Break, which I have not played actually, but
the video game which was also a TV show.
Yeah, and it was somehow neither. So yeah, I always felt like Alan Wake was pretty far down on Remedy's sort of list of cool stuff that they're doing. I'm way more interested in the Control universe and what they're going to do next there.
Well, are they not merging the two? I feel like Alan Wake.
There are crossovers,
right? Okay,
so there are notes you could find in Control that Alan Wake definitely exists in the same universe, and he's discovered objects that they're interested in, like it's letters that you find around the place that you're exploring in Control. So yeah, the universe is definitely linked up. And I think there's actually perhaps it's DLC or something that's quite explicit.
There is, I believe, Control DLC that is actually starring Alan Wake, I think.
Yeah, I think he appears and you sort of see him. I don't think you play as him or anything, but
by overwhelming public demand, Alan Wake
appears in this. Perhaps if it's actually, that's for me the best angle. If Alan Wake 2 is actually kind of segue into the Control universe, that would be pretty cool. Actually, I'd be interested in playing it.
I found the trailer quite underwhelming.
Yeah,
I predict it's going to be actually excellent. I think it trails badly, but I think what it's actually going to be is a really, really meaty survival horror Resident Evil 4 experience. That's just my guess about I don't know, just based on instinct, I guess. That's how it's feeling to me at the moment. So I'm actually looking forward to this despite the trailer.
Yeah, same. I'm also sort of looking forward to despite Alan Wake.
Yeah.
Because the first game, I found physically I didn't get on with it. I found like the control of it and like the pace of it and the sense of combat just didn't jibe with me at all. But also a weird thing about it, which occurred to me was I was thinking why I have this antipathy towards Alan Wake, is that the pastiche of schlock horror paperback fiction just doesn't sit with me in the same way that I enjoyed Max Payne's like completely absurd, excessive take on noir cliche. Because to compare the two, like the golden age of noir cinema absolutely has all of the stuff that Max Payne is spoofing. Like, I could tell the Dane was trouble from the start, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That is a real thing that occurs in all the most kind of famous exemplars of the genre. But Alan Wake, the character, the writer, is at the sentence level a fucking awful writer.
Yeah.
And those cliches that he's spouting aren't actually present in the best examples of that genre. Like Stephen King, I'm not like super well versed in him, but I've read a few of his books, and as far as I can tell, he's a skillful and efficient writer who does not necessarily rely overly on cliche. And so there's just this mismatch for me really in the entire kind of thing that it's doing between what I like about good horror writing and what the game is telling me horror writing is like. And so I couldn't really enjoy it as a pastiche, and that's always sort of like I don't know, and because it's so much about that, the monsters from the id, Alan Wake is creating these monsters by writing about them, his name itself is a pun, all this kind of stuff hangs kind of gloomily over the entire thing. But from what they've shown of the game and what I know of the writers working on it who've come from elsewhere outside of Remedy, it feels like I don't think they're going to necessarily rely on that pulp narration as a crutch as much. Like, one of the protagonists isn't a writer, so that probably helps them dig themselves of that.
Thank God for that.
They won't necessarily, although the character is called Saga, so you know they still got the puns. But they also referenced True Detective as a touchstone, so you know, I'm in there. I'm down with that. They aren't looking to cliched examples of the genre as reference.
I also feel like they're a clever bunch at Remedy, and they have a good sense of humour, and I think they have a sense of humour about themselves. So I can't imagine they would go full blown Alan Wake monologuing about a dog from 19 different angles where you're going, so the dog was myself, but it was also my brother. And when I saw my brother that day, I thought he was a dog. It turns out he was both, all that sort of stuff. So like, I can't imagine they're going to do that irony free like they did last time. I think they'll probably find a different angle on it.
There are a few other cool-looking games. I don't know much about them, but they look good. They look like they have something to say, I guess, is what I'm going for. There's Kunitsugami, Path of the Goddess, which is, I guess it's like a third-person action game, but it's sort of like a kabuki fever dream. Lots of swishing, billowing dresses and dancing swords and stuff in this crazy neon world. That looks awesome. I have no idea really what it is.
Agreed. It looked mental.
Yeah.
I'm into South of Midnight. That's Southern Gothic fantasy from the We Happy Few developers. We didn't see any gameplay from it, but involved a very large skeleton man playing a banjo in the swamp. So that's cool.
I thought World of Horror looked really cool. On the back burner, like it's kind of black and white. It looks like a sort of text adventure, but a detective game at the same time. But it's also obviously just immediate horror themes. Given that in the first few images that I saw of the game, there's a guy just with no flair, no skin, just some sort of flesh dude.
Yeah, I've played a fair bit of that. It's been in early access for years now.
Right.
Chris actually spoke about it on the podcast a few years ago as well.
Oh, cool.
It's very good. It's I don't actually know what this reference means, but I believe there is a card game called Arkham Horror or something like that. Arkham Horror, yeah. So I believe it's very similar to that, but with like Junji Ito sort of styling.
Yeah,
it's great. It has those really good like jump scares that Junji Ito can do when you turn the page around.
Yes.
And see some sort of hideous twisted face. It's pretty much always a hideous twisted face in something a face shouldn't be in.
For sure.
But yeah, it's really good. The writing's great and the music's really good, and it has the visual styling is like almost like 8-bit Mac PC sort of 80s vibes to it, which is really cool. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the full release of that. I did that thing where I was like, oh, this is great. I'm just going to wait for a couple of years for it to come out so I can play the full experience.
I was about to ask you, Jamie, like, is it worth picking up in early access now, or is it worth waiting? I feel like it's worth waiting first.
I think it's probably worth waiting just because I did that thing with Darkest Dungeon 2 recently where I played it for the last 2 weeks of early access that lasted 2 years, and that was a bad idea. I should have just waited. But yeah, no, it's great. It's mad and weird with really good vibes. So I strong recommend on that. I think it'll be getting like 80s and 90s reviews when it comes out. I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Fantastic.
I'm excited about Jusant as well, or Jusant. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's a climbing game from Don't Nod, and it looks beautiful. But I feel just like the idea of climbing as like the central interaction in a game is a rich vein that games haven't really dug into. Obviously, like Shadow of the Colossus and various Zelda games have like a stamina constrained climbing system in them, but I don't know that they're the central experience in the same way. Like I think two games in recent memory have done that, which is Grow Home and Grow Up, where you're basically the entire challenge is about ascent, and they're tremendous. I'm excited to play that as well.
It's weird that climbing is actually like really core to loads of games, but not actually mechanically. So getting to the top of the highest point, towers and Ubisoft games, the first thing everyone does probably in Skyrim is try to get to the highest point. out of just sheer instinct, you get to the top part of the world and you expect a reward for it. But in terms of, as someone who's done a bit of sort of like bouldering and rock climbing and stuff, the actual mechanics of actually the difficulty of overhangs and dealing with situations, very few games have tackled it. The last one
Unclear
I remember
how it's going to work in Assassin's Creed Mirage. I assume it's just going to be the same sort of auto scaling.
Hold down R2 and then your guy just does it. Yeah. Whereas the closest thing I've ever played to that was a VR game. I'm afraid I can't remember the name of it. Whereas actually you're reaching out and grabbing handholds and then having to secure a different handhold and then having to like move your weight around. Like, a lot of rock climbing, in my experience, is like positioning your weight, like where you put your body in relation to your arms, and then swinging sometimes to get to difficult positions and stuff like that. Like bouldering's awesome, and it feels like it should be a rich vein for video games if anyone could sort of distill that experience into like a control scheme that actually works. That isn't just annoying. But yeah, I agree. It's definitely a window.
One game I want to mention, just because, Marsh, when we did this like last year, I think, for the exact same thing, we mentioned it then, which is the game Cocoon, which is the Beatles and Marbles game from the Inside, the ex Playdead developer, which continues to look just completely bonkers and weird. But I just enjoy that we've been tracking its development now for so long. That was actually not trailed, but it was. There's like a good preview of it on, I think, Eurogamer. I'm just checking. Yeah, Eurogamer, about that game. It just looks really fascinating and mad and beautiful. And as I said then, anything the Inside devs do, as long as it's not that fucking Somerville, I will absolutely play.
Fable?
Oxenfree 2. Fable.
Yeah.
Sorry, Oxenfree 2, just as a shout out. I know nothing much about it, but the first game was awesome. I'm really excited about where that goes next. But Fable also, please carry on, Marsh.
Oh, well, I mean, that's really all you can say about it.
Yeah,
because it was just a fully CG trailer starring a very big Richard Ayoade, which was very funny, I thought. So that's promising. But in every other regard, still a big unknown. But I did enjoy the trailer.
It was a genuinely funny trailer.
Which
is
so rare, isn't it?
Yeah,
you watching it, it's like, oh, I'm not even trying to find this funny. This is genuinely funny.
Yeah,
I will say that it is true that it's, of all the trailers watched over the last few weeks, that a lot of them are quite bad, and a lot of them are quite meat and potatoes. And so it was really nice to see a giant CGI version of Richard Ayoade's face, talking to you directly. No one else bothered to do that. So it's like I was very, very glad and happy to see that stuff, and with some good gags in there too, which it's just not easy. Not easy to be funny in CGI. I don't think so. Really good. Lies of P. They had a new demo for this, which I've played up until the boss of. This is the game which is Bloodborne. What if Bloodborne but Pinocchio? It's really it really embraces that as its sort of design pillar. I really like it. I think it's hard to describe it as anything other than Bloodborne Pinocchio, because it's clearly hugely indebted to the FromSoft game, the setting, the sound, the move set. It's got the parrying from Sekiro in it. It's got big monsters. It's got a regen system. It's got it's like the best of FromSoft games in this kind of new package, but with very Bloodborne styling. And I played through the demo, and it's interesting. There's still this kind of weird holy grail thing of someone to make the first actually good Souls game that aren't From Software. Like, they've been I suppose the best anyone's done is a decent go at one, but no one's ever made a real knockout, which I think is amazing personally, that only FromSoft can make these games as good as they are. But this looks like a fair attempt on it, and I think if the game kind of is able to expand on its ideas as it moves forward and show you some kind of crazy sights in that kind of FromSoft way and some disgusting monsters and beasties, then I think it might be in for a shot for be something really special. what it doesn't want to do is fall into the trap of a lot of previous Souls-like, whereas actually once you get into them, there isn't that kind of sense of discovery and depth. That's what I think people find so hard to recreate in a Souls-like. So it'll be interesting to see if they can do that, particularly as it literally is a game full of Geppetto and puppets and a lead character who can only be described as a near actionable facsimile of Timothée Chalamet. So.
I'm not really familiar with the story Pinocchio beyond the Disney adaptation, but does the story justify having this large dark world to explore?
I'm only vaguely familiar with it. I mean, it's bleak. The original story is bleak and horrible in the way that all children's stories were, before a certain point in time.
Yeah, but it doesn't premise like there's a world full of mechanical horrors that you have to do battle with. I don't know where the two things really meet.
They absolutely don't.
Oh.
but when you start up the game, it doesn't say loading; it says lying ...
Oh,
and also it says, yeah, and also
is there like a loading bar which is just a nose extension?
I don't know why they didn't do that. And also when you get to the title screen, it says press triangle to start. Press triangle? What is this? It just felt like complete devilry. Been pressing X or at a push circle to start a game for decades now, and someone comes in with triangle. It's like, whoa, messing with my head, man.
Cool. Well, so what was that? A demo? Was that in early access? What is it that you played?
There was a bad trailer, which followed on from a better trailer I'd seen before. There's like one of those ones that's called a story trailer or whatever, which is a bunch of bits from cutscenes sort of stitched together. And then, a demo which you can still play, I think, on all platforms. And that was good.
I should play it. Weirdly, I've sort of very unfairly lumped it in my mind with the Gollum, the awful Gollum game, which is really unfair. But
I wanted to discuss a piece of news which is relevant to that, because the Embracer Group, which owns many studios now, and also the Lord of the Rings license, announced that it was going to close a lot of the studios it just bought and cancel the games they're making. And the COO in a press conference, Matthew Karch, said this: "I have a high degree of confidence that this entire process is going to easily translate into better product selection that's more profitable and that gives us a greater opportunity for growth in the future and that helps to leverage the IP that we own within our organization. I mean, we own Lord of the Rings. We know we need to be exploiting Lord of the Rings in a very significant fashion and turn that into one of the biggest gaming franchises in the world. And that's obviously something that we're going to be doing. That's a much better use of resources than some of the other projects that some of our teams have been working on. So, I mean, we're never going to see another Deus Ex game, is what I'm taking away from that.
No, but also, Marsh, look, I'm ready to give you all of my money right now for whatever you need after saying that. This boggles my mind, this whole thing. I
guess they just wanted to turn everything into a Lord of the Rings farm, basically, which is dismaying. Just the consolidation of game studios, it seems, invariably means like a constricting of creative possibilities in a really dismaying way.
Dismaying is right, because when they started buying everyone up, everyone was like, who are these people and how can they afford all of these well-respected and highly skilled game developers? And the answer is, well, they can't. They're not going to afford them. They're going to consolidate them. It's a real shame.
Yep. Anyway,
it's just a sad story.
Should we talk about the game that we've all been playing this week, which is Diablo IV? What a lot of clicking, eh?
Aren't all games just clicking, though, in the end? This one in particular, yeah, you're right. I'd love to say, I have a love-hate relationship with this game, but my emotions are not that extreme in either direction to qualify that statement. It's literally just like, sometimes I'm slightly happy, sometimes I'm slightly irritated, and in the middle bit, it's just fucking sponge.
Yeah, I would say that is very much the defining quality of it, that I find it extremely unstimulating to play. I think, Jamie, you previously said it's almost a clicker game. And I think that's exactly right. Not that I hate that. I like it, like Tom. I find it struggle to feel particularly strongly about it, but I can't say I like it or it's time well spent.
It's extraordinary. It is an extraordinary thing, Diablo. I've come to realize as I've played through it over the last couple of weeks that it is absolutely, as the kids would say, mid. But there's something like really wonderful and compulsive about it, but not compulsive like good drugs or like something really exciting. It's compulsive like, I don't know, like prodding up the hole where your tooth used to be, or eating some plain cashews out of a bowl. It's just kind of, it's fascinating. I find it so fascinating what the experience of it is, because Diablo is, again, it's one of, it's one, like the Bethesda open world RPG, it's one of the kind of fundamental forms of gaming, right? That they invented essentially, and has been basically pulled through the entire history of the medium up to this point, and has come with a whole bunch of weird baggage and evolution and idiosyncrasy along the way. But the core loop is basically always the same, right? And they've made this game which is like, they've returned to the sort of violent, dark imagery of previous games after the kind of cosmic stuff in the last one. And, it's got this like beautifully grimdark aesthetic and stuff like that. But ultimately, it is a clicker game. It is a game about making numbers go up. And it is a game about doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And I'd say this honestly, there's nothing wrong with it at all. Like, it's a really enjoyable experience, but you're bang on the money, Tom, in that like it's enjoyable to a point, it's compulsive to a point, it's addictive to a point, but it is in a kind of really unusual sort of space where it's kind of, those things are all kind of okay. Like, it's just a sort of very comfortable, homely place to be. Yeah. Yeah,
Everyone,
and like, I don't mind that it cost me 60 quid, right? 60 quid game. That's just what games cost now. And I was a bit worried and anxious that I would feel like, that was a waste of money, because it's a considerable amount of money for a game which is just clicking. But actually, it feels really substantive. It feels like, that's the thing I really like about it, I think. It feels massive. It feels really like there's just tons of stuff to do and tons of places to go and things to see. And it does seem to sort of almost be like a big comfy armchair that you can sort of settle down into and just not think about the world or anything really, in a kind of slightly opiate way. It's so hard to categorize this game. And when we mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, Marsh, I said like a lot of the reviews had said it's great, but it's definitely a live service game. Everything is caveated. And when you're playing it, I feel like all its qualities are caveated in some way or compromised in some way, in a way that isn't like a vorpal flaw, but just makes it such a unique and not necessarily in a good way experience. I realize I'm sort of talking around my points endlessly, but I do find it's a game that's quite hard to summarize as a qualitative experience.
Tom, you've had a lot more experience with the series than I have. I mean, like I've played them, I've dabbled in them, I've dabbled in them, but I wouldn't say I've spent a lot of time in them. But you have, right? How does this one compare to the preceding games?
I think the first thing I would say is I would challenge. There's a sort of like narrative out there that this is a return to Diablo 2's tone and aesthetic, and it just isn't. If you actually go back and play Diablo 2, which is actually recently remastered, wasn't it? I believe. And actually, like, there are 4 worlds. They're all just wildly different in terms of aesthetics and the monsters that you fight. There's a really structured series of mini bosses and then big bosses at the end of each bit. And then you get a big sort of hooray moment, and then you go to the next stage. Everything is refreshed. Everything feels new. And that like punctures and enlivens the ongoing sort of progression grind that you're actually doing with your character, and that you're leveling up all the time, you're killing stuff, you're finding cool items, thinking about whether you should melt them down, whether they fit your build. That's just a really core part of Diablo that I think 4 is actually very good at so far. I think the itemization is much stronger than 3 on launch. But I think the move to a kind of contiguous open world where you're just kind of wandering from area to area, and there's actually very little difference between them. Everything feels like a kind of sludge, a kind of beige sludge, just aesthetically as you're wandering through from area to area. There are really cool ideas, like there are different zones that belong to different classes, where here's the druid place and here's the sort of the assassin place or whatever. Really good ideas, but I just crave a bit of variety. It's all just porridge. Like
it's a shame, because you can tell that the environments, like the textures, the effects, the object design is beautiful.
Yeah.
But they've had this very murky aesthetic overlaid on them with like a very murky grey fog that seems to be ubiquitous. And it just and while that is like successfully atmospheric and grimdark, it also is powerfully homogenizing. Like, it just blurs all of those places. It doesn't matter really whether you're in the murky grey tundra or the murky grey steppe or the murky grey forest or the murky grey cave or the murky grey mud realm. Like, there was some tombs where there's some moss. I was so excited. And the fact that there are some places which are splashed in gore, I'm just like, yes, thank you, people, for dying and lending this space a bit of color. But the bones of these places are obviously beautiful and designed with real panache. But the game's commitment to grey-brown fog and a low saturation palette just does not help these places express any kind of innate character. To the extent that, like, in other games, you can look at an overworld map and you can quickly summon a mental image of what each zone looks like. I can't do that here at all. Like, the only way I can remember what the difference between the zones are is by what enemy type I find there. And this is like, it's a big problem for a game which is top down, because you're immediately, by having a top down game, not quite top down, but you're removing immediately any kind of distinctive silhouettes that environment might lend to the environment to make it identifiable. And so you do need some differentiation in the color palette or something else to anchor you to the kind of the feeling of those places. And I think that is a real misstep. And I realize it's a misstep they've made, presumably in a reaction to all the complete nonsense complaints about Diablo 3 being too colorful.
Right.
And I think, and I think this is a subtle but very important distinction to make, is that the people making those complaints about Diablo 3 were cunts, and they should not have been listened to at all.
Yeah, these are people who complained about it and then played it for literally thousands of hours.
No, I think that's right. And it's pandering to a game that didn't exist. Like, that vision of Diablo 2 that was this turgid, like, beige mulch for hours and hours, that's not what Diablo 2's like at all. And that's not what Diablo 3's like, deliberately, because Diablo 3 actually has varied environments, and that Diablo 3 has loads of faults, and I sort of think there's loads of problems pacing and sort of how long each act is and how samey, for example, the heaven area is. All of that stuff, fair enough. But for 4 to sort of like default to this kind of, everything's a kind of a desert and everyone's obviously miserable. That is a Diablo thing, to be fair. A Diablo, I should say. But like, the thing about Diablo is that humanity's in a purgatory and sort of doesn't realize it, and there are these sort of like heavenly and demonic forces acting on them all the time, and they're living this horrible, horrible life, and you're there to sort of rescue everyone. But even in this one, there are no clear objectives in terms of, am I even a hero in this world? Like, actually, what am I even doing here? Like, who's my guy? Like, is he or she supposed to be rescuing people or defeating things? Like, there's no sort of drive to it.
Yeah. All I know is that Chris Finch from The Office is telling me to do stuff, and I just obey him whenever he tells me to do anything, because he's got the most wonderful voice in the universe.
He does have an incredible voice, though. I mean, fair enough. I would obey him, I'm sure, as a necromancer. But yeah, actually, so my necromancer is like level 45 now. He looks hideous. I'm very pleased with him. He's a cool guy. But I kind of I have this vision every time he rocks up to an NPC, and I maximize my minion count, so I wear stuff that lets me summon extra skeletons and extra sort of skeleton mages and demons, and a horrible iron golem that is just sort of right behind you. I have so many good screenshots of him just talking to NPCs with this crowd behind him, and he's like, "I'm here to help." It's like, what? It kind of makes no sense. The world kind of makes no sense.
Don't mind my abominable horde of darkness. Just
please ignore. So there's that ongoing lack of sense of who I am, which is kind of present in Diablo games, but in this one it's just sort of like messing around. I think, let's boil it down for me. Like, I think it's down to the structure. I really, really think that the abilities I'm playing with are fun as Necromancer. I think the Necromancer is actually, like, going online as well, is a bit overpowered, so I'm having like a pretty positive experience in that respect. I think like the progression in terms of skills would be, I love the ability to, for free, just reset the skills at any time and just rebuild my character. I think that's awesome.
Can you? I thought you have to pay to respec, don't you?
You do, but it's not very much. They throw money at you in this game anyway.
I've got like 400,000 or something.
Yeah, I've got 800,000. Yeah, you don't quite know what you're supposed to spend money on, but
I think it all end up being gem socketing and stuff and gem merging. That tends to be the money sink in Diablo. But yeah, it's very cheap and easy to respec. My one request to the developers would be to just let me take back 1 point and respend it instead of like resetting all of my points. But then that's, I don't know, that's just a minor thing. But in terms of the progression, items, I think itemization is pretty strong. Legendaries drop, and they, like, you could put on a hat that suddenly really affects one of your skills and can completely change your, how your build works. And they've taken that from Diablo 3. I think that's pretty strong. But as I've been saying in like a sort of Discord chat between ourselves, like, there are two parallel kind of ideas that need to sort of like work together in an action RPG like this. One is itemization, character progression, fun skills, building a character, looking cool as well, all of that stuff, like your character basically. And the other is like just variety in terms of like aesthetic variety, enemies you're facing, story, great voice acting, cool cutscenes, a sense that you're actually being a hero perhaps, or whatever story you need to tell, at least something. And I think so far, for me, I think like the actual kind of itemization and character building is pretty strong, but all of the other stuff is not good.
I have to say, I haven't found it as positive experience in terms of the itemization. I think it might be that it's just very different between the classes, and I'm playing Barbarian, and that's fundamentally not an interesting class to play. I don't know, but I found that, I mean, a part of this is probably because I'm not very literate at sort of min-max stuff. I find all the kind of fine text, choosing between skills very difficult to parse, and also not interesting and not something that motivates me. But I don't find that the game is offering me a choice between skills that have any meaningful tactical differentiation. Like, a lot of the time, you're very much trammeled into choosing one sort of tactic. And you have a number of different things that benefit that tactic, and you can put points into them in like some attempt to gain synergy. And that feels like the game wants to kind of lock you in pretty quickly. I know you can respec, but like you don't end up with a variety of tactics to use. You end up having to choose one of a variety of tactics, even if you can change that choice at a different point. And changing that tactic might be interesting if it felt different. But you're essentially, you end up like do you choose the wallop skill, which does 82 damage but has a 10% chance to crit on enemies have over 75 health, and it inflicts the gimbal status, which means that subsequent noble attacks will do an extra 5% damage and stacks up to a max of 8? Or do you choose the drum skill, which does 82 damage but has 10% to crit, and so on and so forth? And then, like, aside from the maths of that being completely impossible to parse at a glance, you try out both the skills, and it turns out they're basically exactly the same. They do damage in the same, like maybe they do slightly different numbers, and they they key into different status effects. But you're basically doing the same thing. You're being mobbed by a bunch of enemies, and you're pressing the same button, and it does a very similar thing with very little perceptible difference. And like the game has never really shown me why I should give a fuck about these different status effects and the difference between these skills. And like, I can't remember what level I am. I'm like somewhere between 30 and 40, somewhere in the middle there. I've unlocked a bunch of skills and I've respec'd a bunch of times. I felt very underwhelmed by what that has allowed me to do, which has been different from all of the other stuff I've done. And part of that is not just the barbarian's skill tree, but the fact that none of the enemies, doesn't matter whether they're ghouls or they're bats or werewolves or skeletons or goatmen or demons, they all pretty much attack the same way. And maybe a couple of enemies will have spellcasters who hang back, but by and large, there's no group of enemies I've encountered in the entire game so far who've demanded any kind of different tactics from me. And I've died a couple of times, and I've changed the difficulty back and forth. Doesn't seem to be much difference between the difficulty settings. I do die a little bit more on the harder difficulty, but it's not because like different tactics have emerged for me to contend with. It's just that, this time somebody stun locked me and I got a bunch of overlapping attacks on me, and I wasn't able to heal because I stun locked. And or more often, I've died because my mind had wandered from the game and I'd simply stopped paying attention. It's a bit of an indictment. And like, it took me a long time. And like, I feel like one of those Steam reviewers who've put, 40 hours into a game, whatever, and they're like, it's rubbish. But like, I needed to play quite a lot of the game before I realized it wasn't opening up. It wasn't producing new experiences. So I found it pretty disappointing overall in that regard. But maybe I should play one of the other character classes.
I wonder if that might help. I'm playing as a sorcerer, and like, all the stuff you're saying sort of still applies, but I'm having fun with what she does. So like, what I've done with my build is I've just leaned into the frozen and frost and icy powers that she has. And like, there's a whole bunch of words that they throw out there of various states that you can be in. So you can be frozen, you can be frosty, you can be chilled, you can be slightly nippy. And there's a whole bunch of like words in there that all have different degradations of freezing people into ice and stuff like that. And that's actually kind of the way of building a character where I'm just like, one of my words here has popped up on this particular skill tree or on this particular item.
He's nippy, get him.
Yeah, and then bring Marsh in with the drub ability. But like, it's I'm finding that fun because I don't have to think about it too much because I'm an idiot and I can't do the maths or think about things in an involved way. So I'm just like having fun pumping as many skill points into my various freezy verbs in order to, and like, so this is the thing, sort of what I was saying was like, it's good and bad at the same time. Like, my character runs into a big crowd of people. She fires some snowballs. She does some icy things. She does a big area of ice attack, and then she gets an electro whip out and whips everyone to death. That is literally the 15 to 20 seconds of gameplay loop that I just repeat for every single enemy, every single boss in the game. But I like it. I enjoy it for some reason because I actually think that the difficulty, for me at least, is tuned really well, that I think it finds a biting point for your skill, particularly if you bump it up to the kind of second difficulty. This is just for me, but like the second difficulty that's available, tier 2 or whatever it's called. I found that a really like solid level of challenge. Not a solid level of challenge, actually. It's still pretty trivially easy, but it's enough of a little kind of, it's got enough clause in it that it keeps me occupied and doesn't, and stops it from feeling like a clicker game, basically.
How does failure work for you? Because that's my objection to the way that difficulty scales in the game, is that failure just feels almost just very sudden and arbitrary, and like there's no kind of gradation where, oh, something bad is about to happen to me, I can escape from this by employing some sort of thought on my part. You're either alive and you've won, or you're dead and you have to do it again.
No, you're right, and the game basically, the game itself, I'm sure I'm right about this, is a long tutorial for the eventual end game when this stuff starts to matter, right? Like it's a kind of like, you're slowly learning through trivially easy combat and fail states that make no difference over anything, how you will eventually engage with the end game of the game, which is supposed to last forever, right? For like a decade more. And consume your life entirely. And so I think the game is really doing its best to struggle with, reconciling those two sides of it. Of like, the first go through the campaign is basically a walk in the park compared to what we're going to throw at you later. But obviously, for a lot of people, like, we probably don't intend to play this game for the rest of our life at the exclusion of all other activities. So I think that is a tricky ask, and there'll be a version of this game which would be much harder than it is right now, and it's the version of the game that you probably unlock on your like third or fourth go round, right? Where you actually have to think about this stuff and you actually have to build your character in the way that Path of Exile game does pretty well, I think, where like you really do have to think about your build, and that gives you periods in the game where it is trivially easy or easier than before, and then that will plateau out and then you'll end up finding it hard again. For me, there's enough crunch to it to keep me going, but I can totally understand how like actually the kind of early game of this and the first go through it is a little bit discordant with the experience that you kind of want from a game like this.
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing that they're having to design towards, which is that they need to design something which is accessible, but also has enough depth to it that the kind of insane min-maxers, Diablo lifers will still get something out of it. And that's almost impossible, isn't it? And I suppose, viewed from that perspective, they've done a reasonable job of making it so that it's still playable, even if you aren't interested in making your build optimal. You can still get through it.
Well, I think, like, if it was broken into 5 or 6 acts quite solidly, and you fought some bosses, and then, let's say you pay 60, 70 quid for a game, you go up, you're not necessarily intending to replay the game forever. The sort of like the tiered experience of going up through that progression, building your character in a single run isn't strong in this one. I feel as though unless you're planning it to have it as your sort of second screen game that you're going to be sort of like tinkering with for a few years, I think it's good for that, but otherwise I don't think it's good. I don't think it has that immediacy and satisfaction in one run.
Also,
I've
people keep saying
I've needed a podcast to listen to while playing it.
Oh yeah, practically demands. They should have like Pocket Cast integration into it, like a wizard who comes along with you. His mouth opens, and then Behind the Bastards just comes out of the wizard's mouth while they run around. People keep saying that the story's good. I keep reading that and hearing that. It's not. The story's not good. and people in this world really need to stop following people out into the forests in search of the promise of like true knowledge, because it's not ending well for anyone. And it is like between 30 and 50% of the quests are someone saying, "Oh, my old husband, he's such a lovely fellow, and he met a young lady, and she said she could provide him with knowledge of good and evil and all men. And he followed her out into the woods, and I haven't seen him all day." And then
That's a really good old lady accent.
That's very good.
Thank you, young man. I'm available. I could do a podcast in this character.
Everyone's read a terrible book in this game, and like every character's read the wrong page of a thing, or decided to collect all of the poisoned pages into a giant evil library, and they're very surprised by what happens next.
Yeah.
That's kind of the extent of the plot, really.
I mean,
I
you
would say
can't
so
deny
far.
that it has a theme of forbidden knowledge.
That is the theme.
It has a theme. I'm not sure how many Diablo games have had themes before, so that's good. But I feel like the people of Sanctuary need to stop collecting diabolical books of sin.
Burn the libraries.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the people who wrote the quests for this had a difficult job because there's not much. I mean, there's almost zero mechanical differentiation between the quests, and so they really have to come up with a lot of reasons to do exactly the same thing as all the other quests. And some of them are within that difficult task context. I think they've done as good a job as they could.
Also, I feel as though the voice actors are rescuing the script at every point. Like I feel like this about a lot of games. Like the voice actors are sort of really picking up what they've been given and making it work.
The Chris Finch from The Office. I mean, just any moment he's going to tell me that he's read a book a week. But also what's she called? Sybil? Was that her name? The main demon booby lady. I think she's very well voiced as well. Lilith.
Yeah.
Tom, talking of other games of the current moment, new emerging games. I hear you've been playing something called chess.
I've been playing way too much chess. It's been a while since I've talked about chess on the podcast, and I kind of like when we were organising the podcast, I wanted to flag that I wanted to sort of do a chess update for everyone. Chess is still here. It's still happening. This centuries old game. And actually, what's interesting is that obviously the Queen's Gambit happened, the show on I think it was Netflix, and then during pandemic, so there's kind of like a conflation of ideas. Everyone went online. Chess.com is a brilliant resource and a great way to get started with chess. And obviously, viewer figures skyrocketed for live streamed games among grandmasters and tournaments. And you might think that might have died down, but more people are watching chess than ever. It's absolutely huge. And I just wanted to sort of flag it up as a really cool community to sort of be part of. Because, so I'm 37. I'm never going to go anywhere in chess. I have no aspirations to sort of win any sort of tournament but it's such a fascinating, frustrating, irritating, infuriating, compelling game that I've not been able to tear myself away from it for the last sort of 3 years now. And I really wish I'd sort of started at school when my mind was more malleable and able to sort of perhaps pick up some of the concepts. I was playing lots of Go instead, and I love Go, and it is brilliant. But Go doesn't have the infrastructure that chess has. And the great thing about chess is that you can, for free on chess.com or Lichess, Lichess, obviously, you could go to those sites and you can just play games for free. There are puzzles, which is my favorite part of chess now. You could do chess puzzles. There are loads of kind of tutorials, videos from grandmasters just explaining basics. And actually, you could just look at repeats of games. You could play them, have them on your screen, tap, on your mouse or your keyboard, go from move to move, and see how all of that played out. And then look at notation from grandmasters, looking at why this move was played here and why this move was played here. I just wanted to sort of reiterate that it's a really, really cool thing to get into at the moment, to be honest. If you enjoy puzzles and sort of what I would say geometric reasoning almost in terms of how the pieces interact, tactics and things like that, it's a really good thing to it's the best free to play game. It's kind of the top line.
Do you get unlockable cosmetics on chess.com?
So if you no, but if you upgrade to premium, you could change your background. So I've got very posh kind of glass pieces of stuff, which is obviously very silly. But you don't need to do that at all. And I would say also the resources online to actually learn how to play chess are just incredible. Like you've got international masters and grandmasters putting out just free lessons all the time, or just playthroughs of their games. And as they explain them, you can understand the reasoning and actually get insights into how you should perhaps think about the board at any given point. It's just incredible stuff. So I just wanted to sort of have a little bit about how good chess is at the moment and sort of recommend a few channels. Like I got started with Levi Rosman, who is Gotham Chess, on YouTube and Twitch, and he's got actually now like a tutorial site called Chessly, and he's fantastic. He makes he kind of shoutcasts chess. Makes it really exciting. He's relatively sort of spicy and lively for the chess community, and I think he's pretty good. The best person at the moment for me is Daniel Naroditsky. So just Daniel Naroditsky. Google that on YouTube. Go through his sort of like rating ladder climbs. He is like both Levi and Daniel Naroditsky are both like professional teachers, and it really, really shows in the way they produce their content and the videos they make. You go through the entire games. That's the first half, and then the second half with Naroditsky in particular, like he will delve into chess history and sort of he'll go quite deep into analysis and stuff like that. I absolutely love it. He's absolutely fantastic. If you want like a quick thrill, you've got Hikaru Nakamura, one of the best players in the world, one of the fastest players in the world. I don't think he's particularly great for like learning stuff about chess, but watching him play is amazing. Like you can just tune into his Twitch stream. You can tune into his YouTube, go back through his catalog and just watch him just solve puzzles and just beat people in literally seconds. He will just literally defeat grandmasters in seconds. Is amazing to watch. I just want to sort of like give an overview of really cool resources, really fun people to visit and follow, and also just like chess.com is still really good. Chess is still really good, and both of those like you get involved for free, and it's really cool. So I know it's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a cool way to end the podcast, I think. An update on that. And also unusual that chess.com, a site which is the actual noun of the thing, isn't actually a bag of shit that's covered in ads and so forth. It's kind of... I've been trained to expect by the internet that the best URLs always house the sketchiest content. But,
yeah, it's like the right people got the domain early.
It hasn't been bought by EA and turned into a really annoying app.
Cool. Thank you for that, Tom. I will probably never play chess because I'm too stupid, but I wish I was. I wish I wasn't.
I will warn people that chess will always make you feel stupid. I feel stupid almost every time I play chess. So part of the deal.
Well, I think that's probably the whole podcast that we're going to do today. Is that right, gents?
I should think so.
Yeah, sounds good.
If you would like to watch these recordings as videos, you can do so on youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. And thanks as always to our backers on Patreon. You can back us too at patreon.com/crateandcrowbar, or you can join our lovely Discord community, the link for which is on our website, crateandcrowbar.com. Thanks for listening to this Brexit special. I've been Marsh Davis.
I've been Jamie Brexit Britain.
And I've been Tom Senior.
Goodbye.
Night.
See ya.